Hi everyone. Today we're going to work on Simplicity 5785 and I will be making this gown. For this pattern we are going to work with two pattern pieces, number 31 for the bodice and number 32 for the skirt. For both of these we're going to cut our fabric on the fold, and for the bodice piece I'm using cotton. And for the skirt piece, I'm using a white gabardine, and I'm not sure. Our first step is going to be to fold over this top edge of the bodice by 1/4 of an inch. So once you've got that folded over, you can press it. Then we're going to mark these circles. Let's talk about the ribbon a little bit. So I'm using 1/8 of an inch because that's all I have. I also don't have black, so I'm using a gold. If this is all that you have available, by all means, go ahead and use that. If you do have 1/4 of an inch, then what you're going to do is, let's see, let's pretend this is the ribbon. If you have 1/4 of an inch, you're going to cut it 2 1/4 inch length, such as this one. And then you're going to fold it, and you can press that edge so it's nice and crisp, and then you're going to sew it. So it's going to end up being about this size anyway. But if that's what you have, you can use that. If you only have 1/8, then use that. The next step is, once we do our markings on the bodice, after folding down that edge, you're going to go ahead and pin your strap matching the raw edge. And then we're going to just sew at that folded edge. Here are the straps pinned, and now I'm going to sew them. Here are the straps sewn in. So I sewed as close to this folded edge as possible. And I think if you have trouble pinning it because it's so thin and small, you can also use a piece of tape, and that might help keep it in place so that you can sew it. For our next step, we are going to fold this part of the fabric in. This part here corresponds with this piece here, and we're going to stitch here and here. When I have something like this, the first thing I like to do is to measure what my stitch line is going to be. We can also just mark this with some chalk, since we have the circles here. So what I do when I need to make marks like this, I just puncture it with my seam ripper, and then I'll make the chalk marks. Now that I've marked my fabric with those circles, I'm going to chalk the line between them so I know exactly where to sew. So at this point, what we're going to do is we are going to fold along the solid line, and we're going to stitch together those lines that we made with our chalk. So we can go ahead and pin that and circle is. So what you're going to do when you pin it, you're going to pretty much try to match up your broken lines, but ours are just a chalk mark through, and you are going to sew from starting from here to that chalk mark there. You're not going to go all the way through, just stop right there. Okay, let's take it to the sewing machine. When you complete that first one, and I don't know if you can see from with the camera that my stitching is right over my chalk line, we're just going to repeat the same process on the other side, except we're going to flip our pattern piece over so that we'll have the markings be asymmetrical. So again, I'm going to mark my fabric with those circles. And I'm just going to mark here, pulling up the pattern a little bit to expose some of the fabric, just where my fold line is going to be. So once you've sewn up both sides, that fabric in the middle, you can press it towards the center like so. And then this is how your bodice should look at this point. Let's get started on the skirt portion. Now for these lines where we're going to place our ribbon, unfortunately I only have 1/8 ribbon. I don't have 1/4 of an inch, so I'm just going to use what I have. I'm also using gold since I don't have black like the pattern. But if you're looking for like a holiday theme, you can use red, you can use green, you can use anything you want. The only thing I suggest is to make sure you switch your thread to match the ribbon, and then don't forget to switch the thread back again when you're sewing for the skirt. For these lines, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark in chalk my starting point, and the ending point. So I'm just going to flip my fabric over. I mean, the pattern piece, not my fabric. And then just mark that as well. And we can also mark the middle. So this way we can ensure that we're doing it as straight as possible. And another thing that I can suggest when placing this is use some Scotch tape at the beginning, especially because see how mine is like curving? I don't know if you can see that. But use some Scotch tape right here and in the middle and at the end. Now that we've got our ribbon sewn on, we're going to mark these circles on our fabric. And now what you're going to do is you're going to put you're going to use your longest basting stitch, and you're going to start at this first chalk mark, and you're going to end here running a line of basting. You're going to do that twice on each side, but don't gather it yet. Just put in the threads. Make sure you have long threads at the ends so you can pull it, and something to hold on to here, but don't do it yet. So I'm going to show you how to do that if you're not sure how to. All right, so I'm going to set my machine at a long basting stitch, which is the highest one for me. Go back to my presser foot, starting at that pink little circle. I'm going to make sure I have a long thread in the back to work with. And just follow that curve and then stop at the next pink circle. Okay, so then when you're here, just pull it out. This way you have some nice long threads beginning and end. Move those threads out of the way and complete that step again, and do that on the other side as well. But don't gather them yet. First we're going to hem our skirt before we do the gathering. So it's difficult to see here, I think, because I had to switch and use white thread since my bobbin thread with the goldish yellow thread ran out. So I've got my gathering threads here. I'm not going to gather them yet. First, I finished my hem, and we're going to sew that up at about 1/2 inch. So we can do that next before we start gathering. A couple of reminders before we go to sew our hem. One is, if you still have your basting stitch activated or on, go back and change that to your normal stitch length. For me, it's 2.5. And if you were using a different color thread for either the gathering threads or for your ribbon, go ahead and change that to the main color of your fabric. Let's gather our skirts. You're going to pull 2 of the front threads, and you're just going to pull on that while holding the fabric, and that's how your gathering is going to look. All right, so it's a gentle pull. Do the same on the other side, and see how it starts to gather right behind my fingers. Okay, let's move on to our next step. Okay, now that we've got our skirt gathered, and our bodice piece mostly complete, we're going to lay out our skirt right side up, like so. And as you can tell, the waistband is closer to my body than the hem, and I have it like that on purpose. Don't cut away those gathering threads just yet. We're going to need them in order to adjust the fit to match them here. So when you have your bodice piece, make sure that you have the waist portion, that's going to be the waist portion, face towards you, and the right side down. With each end, you're going to match the raw edge. Okay, now I'm going to match my other edge, moving those threads out of the way because I'm going to need them. Okay, so all I'm doing is matching my bodice to the skirt and pinning. Now, let's flip it so that the right sides are facing us, and so you can also make sure that your skirt and your bodice are right sides together. So now this part here in the middle that we didn't gather, that's going to match the middle part of your bodice. So basically, when you flip it back upside down, you're going to pin that. I would say pin it on both sides. And this gathered piece here, we're going to gather and pull using the same long threads until the fabric is matched up with the side. Here is what my skirt and bodice look like now that they're pinned together. And what we can do is we can baste the waist at 1/4 of an inch, take out all the pins, flip it up, make sure you're happy with it, take a look. If you're not happy with it, you can always remove that basting stitch easily and go back and fix your gathers. Let me flip it this side so you can see the gathering side. So it looks a little messy, but once we're done with it, I think it's going to look really nice. So I'm going to go ahead and baste it, check it before I finalize it, and if I'm happy with it, then I'll go ahead and just regular stitch at 1/4 of an inch. All right, let's see how this looks now that it's basted and when I remove the pins. This is the front side. Okay, I'm pretty satisfied with that. I'm going to go back, change the stitching length on my machine back to 2.5, and I'm going to stitch it pretty much over that stitching line you see there. And then once we're done with that, we can start removing all of these gathering stitchings here and the basting stitch. With our seam ripper, let's remove some stitches. Here's where I am with my dress. I have finished the hemming, I finished all my edges, I cleaned up all my threads, removed all the bastings and gathering threads. So at this point, what we're going to do is start looking at finishing up our dress and adding closures. Now, if we look at the back skirt pattern, we're looking at the center back seam here, we see this notch. What we're going to do is we are going to sew from the hem to this notch, backstitch here. Here, let me, with our right sides together of our dress, you can see my notch here. Now, before we sew that up, let me backtrack a little bit. That 3/8 of an inch, fold back the top portion of your fabric and stitch that down, and then you'll stitch the bottom part of your dress up to that notch and backstitch there. This part you're sewing at 3/8 of an inch. Now let's press our dress, press open your seams and add our snaps or whichever closure you choose, and we can try it on our doll. Here is the gown on my doll, and I wanted to show it to you on my doll so you could get a really good sense of how it fits. I personally think that the straps could be just a tad longer, and then here's the back. The ribbons actually do match in the back, it's just the way that the skirt is folding out that makes it look like it doesn't, but if you press it flat like this, there you go, you can see it matches. And here, right about here, is where I have a snap, and I did have to overlap it more than was intended, and I went back, and originally when I had stitched down my seam on the dress, I used all white thread and didn't bother to change it out for the bodice, but then I didn't like the way that looked, so I went back, took it out with the seam ripper and used black thread. So my what do you call it, the sew on snap is right here. Let's see if I can unsnap it so you can see it, and there you can see. I mean, I did the serging in white because I didn't feel like changing it out for that little piece, but you won't see that anyway once this is closed. So I think the gown came out really nice, and I used all cotton fabric, and of course my ribbon, the instructions say to use 1/4 of an inch, but I used 1/8 of an inch since that's all I had, and it doesn't look too bad, but I think the 1/4 of an inch would look better. So I would like to redo this and maybe make the straps a little longer, but I think overall it looks nice. So I hope this video was helpful. Hope you enjoy it, and I will see you soon with some more videos. Thank you so much for watching.